So hello everyone, it's been a while since I've done a two-camera YouTube video and that's for very good reason. That reason is that Tanya and I lived in Ukraine and hopefully will in the future live in Ukraine, in Odessa, but for obvious reasons we've had to leave, and at the moment we are basically setting up an entire new life in the northeast of England in County Durham. Beautiful part of the world, incredibly photogenic. I love being up here. As a photographer, it's a fantastic place to be. But obviously the upheaval and movement and all the sorting out of places to live, etc., have taken quite a lot of time, and being able to set up to shoot YouTube videos has not really been a priority until now. Anyway, I am back and hopefully going to be doing some more regular YouTube videos over the next few months. And the first one I'm going to start with is quite an interesting one about the Fuji X-H2 in relation to its older sibling, the X-T2. This is the X-T2. I bought it in 2017 and I absolutely loved it. It's a brilliant little camera. The ergonomics, coming from a film background, the ergonomics were just absolutely fantastic for me. It's solid, you've got dials, you've got buttons, it's just a wonderful little camera. I've kept this. I upgraded a couple of years ago when it came out to the X-T4, and I had a completely different experience with it. I didn't like it. It felt cheaper. It didn't feel as solid, and the shutter button had a soft shutter button that you could just easily brush and trigger the camera, and it annoyed the hell out of me. It's bizarre. The cameras were almost identical layouts, but the build quality of the X-T2 just seems so much better than the X-T4. Anyway, moving on to last month, I upgraded to the X-H2, the new X-Trans 5 40 megapixel camera. Brilliant, I absolutely love it. It's a much more, dare I say, traditional. It's not really traditional, it's a much more DSLR style camera in that you've got less dials and buttons on the top. You've got an LCD plate and you've got rocker buttons front and back of the body to adjust aperture and shutter speed and stuff like that. But there's been some interesting debate I've seen around the X-H2, and that's regarding its high noise capability. Obviously, you're packing 40 million pixels onto a sensor the same size as the X-T2, which only had 24. So has the extra 3 generations of technology in the X-Trans 5 been able to improve noise in the X-H2 over the X-T2? Or is it, as I might expect, that just the extra pixel density on the X-H2 means that high ISO noise is going to be more prominent on that camera than compared to the X-T2? So I went out the other night into County Durham. You might have seen on my social medias I posted a picture of my camera setup trying to photograph the Durham Cathedral. It was night, it was around 8 o'clock in the evening, so the night was fully with us. The light wasn't going to change. Obviously you've got the lights of the city and the blackness of the river below and the sky above, so you've got these really high contrast low light scenes which all cameras will struggle with. But obviously makes a great test setting for this particular test that we're doing on the high ISO. I put both cameras into pretty much the same situation. I shot on a base ISO of 200. Now the X-H2 will go down to 125, but the base ISO on the X-T2 is 200, so we use that as a starting point. I then basically had shot in RAW. I set the white balance to cloudy on both cameras, and I shot with matrix metering on both cameras. The X-T2 I had the 18 to 55mm set at 23mm, and on the X-H2 I had the 16 to 80mm again set to 23mm, both set to f4. I then shot the shutter speed at the exact center of the metered exposure, shooting manually in both, and I upped the ISO in each case by 1 stop, so basically 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600, etc, etc, all the way up to 25,600, which is the highest on the X-T2. I also, just for comparison, did a higher ISO on the X-H2 because that can go to 51,600. 200, and I compared that to the highest base of the XT2 to see how that compared. It results quite interesting, and let's get into Lightroom. I've imported them into Lightroom. There's no sharpening, there's no noise reduction on the import, so they are literally blank canvases, and I will not do anything other than compare them in this video. In the next video I will have a look at how far you can push them in post-production, particularly at higher ISOs. The older X-Trans 2 with the 24 megapixels compared to the higher megapixels of 40 megapixels of the X-H2, but that's in the next video. For this video we're just going to have a look at the high ISO noise comparison. If you're enjoying this video, please drop me a subscription and a like. That would be most appreciated. Come and join me on Twitter. I've just gone through 10,000 followers on there, which I'm really pleased about. I'm at Jason Rowe Photo there, so if you want to drop in and join the Twitter crowd over there, it's quite a really nice little community going on there for photography. So let's get into Lightroom and have a little look at what we've got. So here we have the images in Lightroom, and in case that wasn't quite clear, the images are color coded. So this one is the X-H2 at 200 ISO, and this is the X-T2 at 200 ISO, and I've colored them both red. We only have 5 colors to grade them with, but as you can see, it's fairly easy to go through and see which one's which. This is the shot that I originally took, and this one is actually taken on the X-H2. And as you can see, it's pretty dark. It's shot at 200 ISO. I've renamed all the files here, so this is X-H2 200 for 200 ISO, and if we zoom in you can see it's pretty clean. There's actually a little bit unsharp, and I suspect that's because the image stabilization was still on in camera, and this was a relatively long exposure time because it was a 200 ISO shot. We won't worry too much about that, but as you can see, even zooming in at 100% and even 200% at 200 ISO, there is no grain as such. It's a very clean image, as you would expect. So if we compare that with the XT2 one, we'll use the comparison tool down here like this, and the select one on the left is the X-H2 and the candidate one on the right is the X-T2. As we can see, they're slightly different colors, even though I shot both at, in the cloudy preset for the RAW. And you can see, obviously, without the image stabilization kicking in on the tripod, the X-T2 is quite a bit sharper. You'll notice as we get to the higher ISOs that the X-H2 is significantly sharper as well, because it's not worrying about the image stabilization being on the tripod. So we'll zoom those both back like that, and we'll zoom in to 100% on the X-H2, and because obviously the X-H2 is a 40 megapixel, if I zoom in to 100% on the X-T2, you'll see that it's actually a different size. So we actually need to zoom in a little bit further to match the size of the X-T2. So if we come in here and we bring these two closer together like that, and just bring that down a little bit in size. So you can see now the X-H2 is at 100%, and we're just zooming in the X-T2 a little bit to bring it up to a similar size. And you can see here, pretty much there's no noise showing in these shadows here. It all looks pretty clean. There is some slight variations in color, and also in a little bit in dynamic range as well. I think the X-T2 shows a little bit of extra dynamic range, which is something that I would expect anyway, just because it's bigger pixels per the size of per the sensor size. So if we come through to, let's go to 800 ISO, let's just go back to the single like that, and we'll go to, this is the 800 ISO. So we'll come to the 800 ISO. This is the X-H2 800 ISO file, and this is the X-T2 file, and we'll go to the comparison there. As you can see, again, it looks pretty clean. The X-H2 looks very clean. in the shadow areas, nothing really to worry about there. And the same with the XT2, a similar size. Really very little difference, no noise showing up in either of those. So we'll go back to the full screen and we'll just deselect those for a moment, and we'll have a look at the ISO 3200. So this is 3200 on the X-H2 and 3200 on the X-T2, and we'll compare those. And now you start to see a difference, very, very slight. One thing that's quite noticeable is that the X-H2 is quite a bit sharper than the X-T2. Now that might just be because there's more detail in it. It might be that the X-T2 is doing some sort of noise reduction in the raw files. I don't know whether that's the case or not. But there is a definite difference in sharpness, but there is also a slight difference in noise. There is a little bit extra noise creeping in here into the X-H2 at 3200 ISO. So there is a little bit of a difference there, and that's to be expected. You've got more pixels in the same amount of area, so they are much smaller pixels. So if we just pop back to the main screen again, and we'll go up to 6400, select both of those and have a little look here, and we'll bring this one back to where we were, and you can see again it still looks sharper, quite significantly sharper in fact. And I should say that all these images were imported with no sharpening and no noise reduction, so these are as flat as raw as you can possibly get. It definitely looks sharper, but there is definitely some more noise showing up in the whites here and in these shadow areas. Wouldn't say it's a huge difference, and the file at 6400 is perfectly usable, but there is a significant more noise in the X-H2 than there is in the X-T2. So we'll take it up to 12,800 and have a look at those. Let's just select those and go in. And you can see quite significantly now, remaining sharper, but a lot more noise at 12,800 in the X-H2 than there is in the X-T2. It kind of makes me feel that this softness kind of makes me feel that there is some sort of noise reduction going on in the X-T2, even in RAW, but it's difficult to say, confirm that is the case. However, it is quite noticeable that the noise is significantly higher at 100%, looking at it at 100% on the X-H2 than it is on the X-T2. Very noticeable here. That said, if we zoom back and zoom back in again, it's not disastrously so. It's usable at 12,800. It's not something that you would want to print as a full-size image for a gallery, but shrunk down to a 1200 pixel web image, I'm sure it would look absolutely fine. But yeah, so above 6400, you really start to notice that the X-H2 is, I would say, significantly noisier than the X-T2. We'll just have a quick look at 25,600 as well and see how that looks. So we'll select both of those, go to compare, and let's get this. We'll get this into the same position here. As you can see, they're still pretty much the same size. The X-H2 is at 100% and the X-T2 is at 122% to match. And you can see both of them exhibit quite significant noise. The X-H2 definitely much more than the X-T2, but again the X-T2 looks just a little bit soft, as if there may be some sort of noise reduction going on. Not sure if that's the case. The X-H2 looks sharper again. That could have been because of the extra megapixels, but it is definitely much noisier. The dynamic range, again on the X-T2, it does seem very slightly higher. If you look into the windows, perhaps on the top right, you can just see a little bit more definition in those windows, and the exposure was pretty much exactly the same on both images here. So that's kind of to be expected. So we're going to do one more little test, and that's we're just going to compare the XT2 at its highest ISO of 25,600 with the XH2's highest ISO of 51,600. So let's have a quick look at that. And as you can see, on the XH2, it is really noisy, pretty much unusable. I certainly wouldn't like to use that in any form whatsoever. It's very grainy, still quite sharp. However, if you zoom back, you can see if you wanted to use it as a very small web picture on a page, you could probably just about get away with it, depending on how far you push it in post-production. But at 51,600, I would say that's really just a get-out ISO if you absolutely need it on the XH2. So those results are surprising, but probably not surprising. I'm not sure that technology has advanced so far that you can eliminate noise when you've got a higher pixel density. I'm no scientist, I'm no technician on this, but it does seem that the XT2 did deal with noise slightly better. Once you got past 6,400, it was slightly better than the XH2. Not a great surprise. However, the XH2 did seem somewhat sharper. Now, whether there is some sort of noise reduction going on, I don't know. I'm not sure whether you can do noise reduction on RAW files or not. That's for people far more qualified than me to answer. But the fact is, the results were not surprising to me, perhaps surprising to some, but in either case, above 6,400, probably not usable, but 4,000 and below, certainly very usable in most scenarios. Dynamic range seemed very slightly higher on the XT2. Again, that's probably something you would expect, but it's marginal. In a future video, I'm going to go out in daylight and shoot some sort of high contrast daylight scenes under the same conditions with both cameras, and we'll push those in Lightroom and see how far we can get with them, and before they break up, and see which holds out the best in dynamic range and other aspects of that. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I said at the beginning, drop me a like and a subscription if you really have enjoyed it. I plan on doing a lot more Fuji related stuff. I know there's some very good Fuji YouTubers out there, and I'm sure I'm not going to even attempt to compete with them. But if you are enjoying my series on Fuji cameras, then please drop me a sub, and I'll see you in the next one.